Wonderful. Oh, wonderful. We'll see people as they're jumping in as well, which is great.
Yeah, got 2 people in.
This is where you bring out the puppy. Okay. When we have, like, instead of hold music or the elevator music, you bring out the puppies.
Yeah. Just a bunch of puppies chasing their tail.
Yeah.
That's what we all want to see, right? Yeah. Yeah.
We've got a couple of yes pleasers, so.
Cool. Welcome.
If you feel comfortable, please feel free to turn on your audio and your video. We'd love to have a chat. I'm going to start at sort of 5 past while we're waiting for people to jump in. So yeah, feel free to just jump into the puppy chat that we're having.
The only reason I'm
I knew as soon as I said puppies, you'd jump in.
Hey, Pavi. Hi, everyone. I just thought
Hey,
I'd jump in
Denise.
because you said puppies, so I just had to jump in. How's everyone going?
Good.
Good. Yes. How are you, Denise?
I am well, thanks. I need another cup of coffee, but it's too hot.
Oh, it's too. Is it? Where are you?
Melbourne.
Oh,
We're hitting 30 degrees today.
wow. You had some good weather lately, I think. Oh,
Don't jinx it, Lenny.
Define
this is
good
all
weather.
we have. This is literally all we have going for us.
All right, I'll shut up now. Good luck, everyone.
Thanks, DP.
Denise.
For those of you who have joined us, we're just going to kick off at 5 past. So we're just waiting for a few more people to jump on. Feel free to jump in and say hi as well if you feel comfortable turning on your video or just audio. If video is not comfortable, that's fine as well. Does everyone have access to the chat? I think it is turned on. I've got a few people messaging in there, but just let me know if you have access to it.
I can see it, so hopefully others can too.
Okay.
I can't access it. It's saying chat to say.
Access it.
Sorry, folks. Let me just adjust that one. That's on me. A bit of a little tech moment.
Disabled for me as well.
There we go. That should do the trick.
Wonderful. Great. While we wait for the next minute to kick off, if you just want to throw into the chat where you're based or where you're listening in from, let us know so we have a bit of an idea where everyone's kind of coming from and which areas. Great. Looks like we've got a good mix. Wonderful. All right, I think we'll have people jumping in and out. Obviously, there's a whole week of sessions happening, but I just wanted to say hi, everyone. Welcome to the session today to celebrate all the wonderfulness that is International Women's Week that Striving is doing. So not just the one day, but we've extended it out. So there's a lot of sessions happening during the week. Before we jump in, I'd love to do an acknowledgement of country and cover off a few housekeeping items as well. So I begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm hosting this panel discussion from today, and pay my respects to the elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples participating in this session today as well. So a little bit of housekeeping. The event is recorded. We won't be sharing the recording anywhere though. This is mainly just for our records. So feel free to put in questions and comments in the chat as we go. And we'd love to get people to be as open and honest as possible throughout this session. So the more that you put in, the more we can get out of this conversation, because that's what we're trying to do today, is have a bit more of a conversational type panel as well. So in terms of what we're going to be talking about, you would have all seen the news spreading like wildfire across your socials over the last week and a half from WGEA disclosing the gender pay gaps as well, which is very timely for today's discussion and the topic. So lots of companies have been publicly ousted, in other words, for being the best or the worst at managing their gender pay gaps. So we're joined by two lovely, amazing people today who are passionate about this topic, and we'd love to share with you some relatable pieces of advice for people who'd like to be allies in the workplace. So covering off, what can you do individually, but also how can we keep the collective momentum going on this issue as well. So without further ado, let me pass over to our lovely panelists to do a quick intro, let them tell you about themselves and what they're doing as well, whilst in the back end, you'll see a little poll that will also pop up for those listening in. Lenny, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Pavi. So hi, everyone. I'm Lenny. I am originally from Czech Republic, but I have lived in Australia for the last 8 years. I've got about 10 plus years of experience in talent acquisition, mainly in startups and scale-ups, in tech startups. And now the last 4.5 years, I've been with AirTrunk. We design, build, and operate hyperscale data centers. And I'm definitely very passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's why I'm here. So welcome, everyone.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lenny. Ankit?
Yep. Thanks, Pavi. Nice to meet you all, everyone. My name is Ankit. I am the founder of Start to Scale. It's a talent and people advisory based out of Sydney. We serve customers across sort of the APAC region. My background is recruitment. I've worked for Atlassian. Most recently, I was the head of talent for a company called Search.io, which is a 30-person startup that saw an exit via acquisition by a company called Algolia last year. So now Start to Scale just helps startups and founding teams create really data-driven, inclusive talent and people practices. And I'm excited to be here and nice to meet you all.
Wonderful. And for those who don't know me, my name's Pavi. I have started off, a long time back in medicinal chemistry and then kind of went into the people space. So I had worked across HR, talent acquisition, and then kind of went back to people and culture recently. So worked across a few corporates. And then in the last 5 to 7 years, have been working across startups and scale-ups to be able to basically put in their people functions, and also volunteering on the side, being able to work with both Lenny and Ankit as well across Jobs for Humanity and helping underrepresented groups find jobs as well on the other side. So that's us. Thanks for joining us. And thanks for everyone that's also answering the poll, because it'll give us a really good idea about where you're at right now or where your company is at right now. So I'll kick off with Ankit. Did you want to go through what advice would you give people who are looking for practical ways to show up as an ally and raise awareness about gender pay gaps? And just to give context, I think there's about 38% of the group here that have ticked no for they don't have any initiatives in place in their company right now.
Yeah, no, that's
is
not surprising,
big.
I'd say. But I hope that, the momentum that you spoke about externally with Gia's report, and I think there's a few more reports on their way. I think the UN had, I'm just trying to remember what it's called. I think it's the labor organization, International Labor Organization. They have some great reports on, I guess, the gender gap, but it is quite a loaded question. So I guess from like a raising awareness standpoint, actually, first and foremost, I'm just going to start off and say, happy International Women's Week, everyone. And for all the women in the call, what a great time to be alive. I was thinking about this last week and over the weekend as well, like leading up to IWD week. It's our ancestral mothers, grandmothers, females would be so proud to see where we are today in terms of not just having this conversation like as a society, but in the work context. We have a long way to go, which is why we're here. But I just wanted to acknowledge that before I get started. So yeah, it's awesome that we're doing this. And I guess to answer your question around what was it, the awareness and being an ally, I think first and foremost, it's important to acknowledge that you have to care, right? If you don't genuinely support this cause 100%, if you're behind this, there's very little movement on the needle that's going to happen. If you are one of those people, which likely wouldn't join a call like this, but you should probably get out other people's way. If you do genuinely care, which is likely everyone in this call, there's a few ways that I personally have found effective to raise awareness, and myself being quite a data-driven individual, I always recommend gathering data points around this kind of stuff, right? As little subjectivity we can bring into it, the more impact we're going to have. With Gia's report, International Labor Organization's report that I spoke about, I've found, especially in larger organizations, when we bring that momentum that happens externally in the market back into an organization and piggybacking off that momentum, is when you're really able to raise awareness at scale in an organization. Of course, in smaller organizations, it's a little bit easier to do compared to large multinationals, but I'm a big fan of writing blogs if your intention really is to raise awareness. Write a blog, gather all of these data points, put your opinions on paper, put your passion on paper, which I'm seeing a lot of now in the market, and spread that awareness that we have backed by real data internally within your organizations. In terms of like being an ally, I think there's a few ways to go about it. We often hear like the amplifier effect, right? In psychology and in sort of organizational culture development. But that's all about just kind of not just listening, but kind of amplifying when a female colleague makes a point, when a female employer writes a blog about the gender gap, right? That's your opportunity to reiterate that, right? And drive that dialogue across what I call the LOL layer, which is not just people leaders, but leaders of leaders, right? That layer of hierarchy that sits one level above most people managers, where I seem to have these folks seem to have the most amount of autonomy and authority to drive, dialogue around this discussion. So being an ally to me means you're amplifying these voices, you're doubling down on the sentiment that is echoing widely across the market. And if you happen to be like a leader that yourself, or you're in a leadership position, whether it's male or female, now's a brilliant time to go out and seek women that you can mentor. I don't know how I did that. Bubble just appeared. Thanks, Apple. But bring the women that generally are quite, reserved and quiet, into the fold, and actively seek out these women to mentor them. We've seen, from a talent and people perspective, women want to apply to roles that meet over 80% of their skill set before they apply, whereas men will just apply to roles that are meeting at least 60% of their skill set. And I think that speaks to a wider sentiment of perhaps a culture or a feeling of reservation that we need to combat here, right? So I think it's important for us to remember that. And I guess amplifying can also extend to advocating for pay transparency. Sometimes we just need to be brave, right? Most of us are people and talent folks in this call, but the ones that aren't, or maybe some of us don't even know that pay secrecy clauses in contracts were made illegal in Australia as of December last year. So that clause in a contract that says, hey, you can't talk to your colleagues about your pay, well, that's illegal now in Australia, completely outlawed. And it's going to feel weird for the next couple of years talking about your pay, because we're effectively early adopters of this legislation. But it's important for us to openly have this dialogue with our male counterparts who we see are advocating for this cause. It is going to be weird because, again, it's early days for this legislation, but in the near future, I think everyone's going to be talking about pay. So that's what I have to say. The other thing that I would add, just one last thing, is that there is, especially in the tech landscape, this culture of diminishing women when you see it, and you're a male in particular. Like, we have to speak out, right? Don't hold leaders accountable. Call out the shit when you see it. Excuse my language, but that needs to be nipped in the bud. And this culture, especially in tech startups that I see all too often, it needs to stop. And the only way that can be done is when you just sort of conjure up a little bit of bravery, and as a male or even as a female, just speak up about it, right? We have some brilliant platforms now. We've got Blind, which is like Glassdoor, but like anonymity on drugs, and we have Grapevine here locally. So I think organizations need to realize that employees are now the ones that are in control of the narrative. And I think, irrespective of what if you really can't do anything, these are great platforms for you to go to and vent and kind of drive change through an external kind of means. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I'll pass off to Lenny. Did you want to share your experiences? What have you used, or initiatives that you've seen work really well?
Yes, sure. So maybe first I'll start with ally. So what does it mean to be an ally, right? I've recently read a really good explanation of the word, which, you can look at the word as an acronym. So A, as Ankit was saying, amplify the voice of the group that you are supporting. L for listen, because, there is a lot that they have to say. They have different experiences, different looks at the world. So definitely try to listen as much as possible. And then L, so learn, because again, we all have a different cultural lens, different experiences. So learn as much as possible and try to understand their point of view, and why for yield, for the group that you are going to help or that you are supporting. And anyone can be an ally. Okay. What just happened? Sorry, my computer just going crazy. Okay, now I'm back. So anyone can be an ally, but allyship is about removing barriers for the specific group that you're going to support, looking or examining the systems that you have currently in place and thinking broadly about how does it impact this group. Maybe you don't think about it because it doesn't impact you, but again, how does it impact the group that is underrepresented? And then putting things or putting words into action. So what actually can be done? And again, as Ankit was saying, it comes with a lot of difficulty. Typically, it's not an easy process at all, and it takes a lot of risks, and it's never ending, right? Like it's a journey. It's a long-term journey, and we shouldn't give up. We should always stay up for what we want to support. So that's kind of an intro, I would say, but no, I'm not going to go there now. But in terms of the gender pay equity, I think the majority of us on this call are in talent acquisition or HR P&C space, I think, right? So I think we have a huge opportunity because we have the privilege in our positions to influence, typically, or we are part of the decision to influence the remuneration of a candidate that we're offering the job. So what I've seen in my space is that sometimes, you might have, let's say you're hiring 2 people for the same position, and you might get to a male and a female. In Australia, of course, you can ask for what the person is currently on. They can tell you they can't, or they don't have to, up to them. But if they don't, or at least what we do in my current organization, okay, we look at the market rate for the role. What's the market rate? And doesn't matter where they come from. It could be that the woman is currently at 130, for example, the man is at 160, but we're going to pay both 180 because that's the market rate for the role. And it doesn't matter that the woman gets, whatever, like 40% increase and the man only 15% increase. We will pay them for what the role is worth. And I think sometimes in other markets, apart from Australia, if any of you are hiring in APAC, you will know that, for example, in Singapore, it's a common practice to ask for their current payslip. And they have to, they don't have to, but typically they're happy to provide it. And if the female, if the situation happened in Singapore, I know that I would have a hard time negotiating or convincing my partners in Singapore to pay them the same, because they would think, well, the woman, like this person, doesn't matter, but it is probably the woman who is coming on at that lower rate. Why should we give her a 40% increase? So, I am in a role of privilege, I would say. So I'm using that to my advantage and make sure that we pay them the same.
No, it's really good. And it is difficult when you're not in that position and when you have to push for it as well from the other end. We did have an anonymous question that came through covering that exactly. So women from underrepresented groups are more likely to not speak up in a mostly male or white dominated function. So how can we coach or mentor them to be more vocal? Do either of you have any experiences in helping that coaching or mentoring of that space at all?
Yeah, I do. Actually, quite recently, I was working with a startup that was around sort of 60 people, quite a distributed team, and they we rolled out quite a large sort of inclusion initiative around that. But a part of that was addressing what the founder called, the quieter bunch within the group. And when we looked at this quieter bunch, there were generally women, and these women were generally from the Philippines or the Indian subcontinent, which is, I think, that cross-sectionality that this question is talking about. And we noticed also within that organization there was the clique, right? The loudest voices in the room, right? That were, again, white and male dominated voices. And it was, a really quick fix that worked for this startup. It might not work for you, but I'm just sharing kind of what we did here was we created a ritual. It was an hourly meeting once a week, just after lunchtime. So if folks wanted to, go and get their coffee and come in to what they called, I think it was empowerment lunch hour is what they called it. And it was invite only. And that was very intentional. I'll tell you sort of what that was about, and I'll talk about the sort of topics that were covered here first. But the empowerment lunch hour was effectively a weekly meeting for an hour They would have speakers or guest speakers or even members of their team talk on different topics. And the intention was to allow the quieter, quote unquote, quieter bunch to really have their voices echo within this controlled chamber, right? So they spoke about topics like imposter syndrome, negotiation skills, assertiveness training, things that are extremely important for this group to kind of wrap their head around. Of course, it was a startup, so they didn't have money to bring in guest speakers every single week because startups are poor. So instead, they started just watching TED Talk videos, right? So they went around and every week they would have a TED Talk that would run for 10, 15 minutes. And then this quote unquote quieter bunch would discuss that TED Talk video and all of these thought leaders around the world on topics like imposter syndrome, how that impacted them directly. And then eventually this invite-only meeting kind of opened up for others. But by the time this quote unquote loud group and clicky group came into the picture, the voices in the room were so loud that and they felt so confident discussing these things that there wasn't much I guess resistance this click could put up. So yeah, I think that's a fantastic initiative. It was hyper creative. The founder was all on board. And most importantly, the founder gave the team complete autonomy on what they want to watch, what they want to discuss, and gave them the free reins to run this 1 hour per week. And I think now they're in their, what is this, 6 months now, and it's still going from what I hear. But that's one that sort of comes immediately to mind.
No, that's actually a really great initiative. I love that it was also founder supported and driven, because that, for any initiative, it always makes such a big difference when it comes from top down, and we talk about that all the time, but to see it in action is a very different thing as well. What about from your side, Lenny? How do you kind of go about helping people be a bit more vocal on that, and if they don't feel comfortable?
An easy one I can think is in a team meeting, just give them the space, because, and call them out. And I know that can make some people uncomfortable, but we have some people in the team that wouldn't normally speak out, and then some others would take the whole space. But in this situation, there is an ally who stops the meeting, tells the other person who's been talking for 15 minutes, okay, now it's a turn to hear others. And I would say, so and so, what do you think? And this person, their English might not be their first language, so I'm not going to give them just 5 seconds. I'm going to give them maybe 15 seconds. So there might be a 15 seconds of silence, but I'd rather give them that space and time to think about what they want to say. And I know that they will give it to us. They will give us their opinion if they are given the space and the time.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of difference, right? Having that space to talk and having that space to somebody actually pull you up on it in those meetings. That's not a lot of your managers, unless they know. And I know this is coming back from the earlier webinar today. Tova was talking about this as well. If you don't speak up for yourself, it's really hard for your managers to know what you've done, what you've achieved. So a large part of this is actually flipping it around and saying, if you don't talk about it, if you don't give that impression or that feedback in itself, nothing changes. Nothing shifts the dial more than yourself first. So I feel like that's a huge player. And this is me also speaking from my own experience, because I was very much, up until a few years ago, I would not raise it. I came back from mat leave and I would just go along with whatever, people in interviews, again, sharing my own experience. People in interviews, males mainly, have said to me, oh, you've taken a year off. Do you think you're ready for this role? Do you think how has taking a year off to go have a baby apparently was seen? And this was, I'm not even talking a long time back. This is in the last 5-6 years. That perception is still there in itself. So calling that out, and that's probably the first time I actually felt comfortable to actually go, no, this isn't fair. You wouldn't have asked a male this question if they had taken time off to go look after their child. This would never be called out. So it's taken me years to get to that position, and a lot of it has been, you know, going back to my circle of friends and going, oh, you know, what do I do in this situation? How do I actually approach this, to the point where I feel a lot more comfortable now. But it took me that journey and those years of those experiences, and then just kowtowing to that culture before I actually got comfortable in this space.
Yeah.
More power to you, Pavi.
Yeah.
I think that's a difficult conversation for women to have, but it's very important that, you know, women in this call, or women that might watch this later, you know, see that, and hopefully some of them will reach out to you if they get stuck in similar situations. You know, it's important to have that allyship and mentorship sort of around the community. So more power to you. Kudos.
Thank you. But like I said, yeah, it was a long journey. It's getting there is it is a journey in itself. And I think a lot of people sort of sit back and go, oh no, I'm too scared to do this. Or it is a lot of imposter syndrome, because if you have somebody asking you those questions saying, are you good enough? So many times in a row, you then automatically go, oh, am I actually good enough? Like, have I actually done this to deserve it? And the answer is always yes. Like, if you're asking yourself that question, the answer is always yes.
Exactly.
But be comfortable calling it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think Deepak also said something in chat which is super insightful. And I think if any individual who does say something to that effect, I think it's quite important to remind them, you know, if you go and ask your wife, you know, how did raising a child compare to a job, or your mum about how it compared to a job, many of them will say it was a job in itself, right? So kudos to you, Deepak, for bringing that up.
Yeah, 100%.
I also think the interviewers who ask these type of questions shouldn't be interviewing. Like, it's such you know, it's such a biased question. They basically, you know, have an assumption, a bias that they've created in the brain. Obviously, our brain creates these biases all the time because the brain's trying to help us, but not always the brain does get to the right conclusion, right? So if that's extremely biased questions, and it just showcases that this company probably hasn't done interview training.
Or they have, and a lot of the time it comes from leaders, right? It's the same, again, like we were talking about, it's those leadership that have just, you know, biased the rest of their senior leaders into that space, and they think it's okay to ask that. Or, you know, even if, again, sorry, I'm sharing some more examples because there's so many examples out there. I feel like if we open it up to a lot of the people in this chat, there would have been at least a couple of times in your career, over your career, where you've come across this, or other colleagues that have experienced it. But one that happened probably in the last year, it's not even like that long ago, the last 12 months, a couple of people in my network know about this one, but I had to actually call out another startup company and say, I know the other people interviewing, because it's a small world, we all know each other, we're all interviewing for the same jobs at some point in time. But calling them out in an interview to say, hey, I know that a male colleague that is in your interview process is being offered 50K more than I am. Where is that discrepancy coming from? And actually calling it out to them. So it is a lot to get to that point. It is that shifting the base that we are always talking about. But if the founders don't see it, or they don't understand it, then that's your red flag. That's already your red flags into that company, to get an understanding at that very early stage to go, they don't respect women coming into it, because it's the same role, same background, same experiences that you have with these other people. So what's the difference? You know,
That's just shocking.
Yeah. And like I said, it's not even 12 months ago that these things, so we're still seeing it a lot more. But I feel like in terms of the other end of things, if we don't share these stories, if we don't, you know, talk about it openly, it's really hard to make any of those changes, because there are people that are sort of sitting back and going, oh, this is just going to keep happening again and again. What can I do? And it really comes back to the, what can I do? I can't really make any difference here as well. I know someone else had just popped in a question saying, what role can HR play here? Quite a big role, I feel like, internally, because we're doing this with our current company now, is having those, in our one-on-one sessions itself, we know who those people are. So I make it a point to actually go and have one-on-ones with everyone across the company. I know it's not always going to be as accessible, but just touching base with different departments and different parts of your company to get a really deeper understanding, and a confidential chat as well to say, how are you actually doing? How is the rest of the team doing? How open do you feel raising these issues? Because unless you're actually touching base with different parts of your organization, you only, at some points, like if your organization's really big, you'll only see what the senior leaders are sharing back to you from a HR perspective. Like if you've got HR business partners, make it part of their role to actually go and sit with those different departments, touch base with people that are not just your leaders across the company, because that's where all of these information and all these nuggets of information will come out of.
Yeah, agreed. I think I'd like to add to that, if that's all right. I think it's that question sort of speaks about what kind of structures we can put in place, right? From a HR people talent perspective, it's all about sort of structure and guardrails that we put in place within which the employee pool just thrives, right? And I think one of the biggest guardrails we can put in place from an inclusion perspective is values, right? And I know this sounds very startup-y because startups have that flexibility and it's possible for them to create values because they don't have them at all. But if you do ever get into into a startup where there is an opportunity to create values, take that as an opportunity to create some really intentional boundaries around inclusion, right? A startup I recently worked with didn't have values. I wanted to go through that process, and we came up with a value called more angles, different perspectives. And the description to that value was, we welcome diverse thinkers and we value the perspective our diverse team brings into everyday conversations, or something to that effect, right? So it's encoded in the company values, and that allows, from when we speak about top down, this is top and everywhere, right? Because values go across an entire organization. So Atlassian had a value called open company, no bullshit. That was when I was there. That created this culture of just transparency and openness, and anyone can talk about anything. Anyone can write a blog article about absolutely anything. And Confluence was a hot, spicy mess at that time. It was very entertaining because everyone's speaking out, right? No one sort of has any fear to address issues that might be considered taboo in some other organizations. When I started Start to Scale, I created a value very intentionally: inclusion over diversity, and when I work with customers, it's really important for them to get inclusion right before they start hiring for diversity. There's no point hiring for diversity if we're not going to create an inclusive workplace for them, right? So these are things from like a HR perspective that I think are very important to address. If you're in a bigger organization, you can't rechange your values. Look at your recruitment process. Lenny spoke about this, right? Like you start at the very beginning, at the interviewing and offer stage, right? If I've had also candidates that were women that were 80K under the role budget. And instead of thinking, oh, this is where we can save money, it's important to say, no, we're going to pay, what that level pays. We're going to pay in line with the competencies and skills that are required at that level. And we're going to pay fair from the very beginning. So we don't have to have this conversation about gender pay gaps because everyone's getting paid fairly, right? And then from a promotion perspective, sorry to ramble, but from a promotion perspective, it's important that we can be self-critical. We've got this legislation where people can talk about their salaries. This is a time where HR and leaders start thinking, okay, if people can talk about their salaries now, am I going to look good or am I going to look bad, right? Yeah. Let's start leveling fairly and pushing out these biases, because now it's legislatively encoded and people are going to start talking about their salaries, and women are going to start finding out that they're being paid 10K, 20K less, and that's going to go on to Blind, that's going to go on to the Grapevine, and your employer brand is going to suffer a cost that's going to be way more than that 40K discrepancy, right? And yeah, I think it's really important to sort of talk about that and nip it in the bud really, really early from a HR and people perspective, if that makes sense. Yeah.
No, definitely. I just put in there in the chat, if you feel comfortable, I know there's a few people that here indicated that they do have some initiatives in place in terms of gender pay gap bridging. So would love to hear what ideas that you've got in place in your current workplaces or other workplaces that you've heard of that have worked really well, because I think that'd be good to kind of share in this space so that we can actually take it back. You know, anything that you've got or you've seen work would be ideal. From the other side of things, like while we're waiting for some people to drop their ideas and things in there, how have you personally encouraged others in your workplace to create this change? I know that we've talked a lot about how we can coach and mentor them. Are there people specifically in your workplaces that you've done this for recently, or you can, based off of this conversation, that you can actually take it back and go, okay, great, I know from these conversations, you have a few people in mind, you're like, oh yeah, I know this and this person that have already come straight to mind. And what are your kind of next steps? Do you want to go, Letty?
Yes. I think we've already touched on this, but yeah, definitely has to go from the top. Like if the leader is not on board, you know, you can't really do anything. In my organization, the CEO is very passionate about diversity and inclusion, and he's very much on board. And it was up to the point where you know, where we had to showcase what we've done in order to attract females, for example, for specific roles. And you know, as I said before, it's much more difficult because we're in a very male-oriented space. 99% of the applications we get are males. There is potentially one female, which is typically not right for the role. So it's about doing something above and beyond that you can in order to attract the other diversities into the role than just the typical white or not white male. So when you have that support from the top, I think then it's looking at the policies that you have in place. Are they inclusive? Do they work for everyone? Have you talked to the people that are different to you? Have you asked them about their opinion? Have you looked at what do we have currently in place that doesn't work for them? How can we change it? So as Ankit was saying, it's about creating the dialogue, holding conversations, learning outside of your comfortable space, outside of your comfort area, and then also, you know, challenging your thinking, challenging what you know and what you don't know, because there is a lot that we don't know. So that's probably what I would say.
Wonderful. I'm going to quickly throw in one practical thing that I do know a friend of mine does. And for those that are in the talent space and have the ability to do this, his go-to in this space, and obviously when we're coming from startups and tech, it is really hard to find that mix as well. He'll specifically source for just females and send through the top 3 candidates with just females in that space. I know it doesn't work for every single role, but that's his go-to. He's like, this is the way that I help make a difference, because it's really hard when even if you put in 6 candidates in front of them, a lot of hiring managers that already have this bias will automatically go to the, oh yeah, let's just go straight to the males. So his way around it is to go, I'm actually not putting any males in front of you, and make it very clear up front that these are your top 3 or 4 candidates and they're all females. I want you to interview them first before we even step into that next space.
That's exactly what I do. And, you know, unfortunately, LinkedIn still doesn't have the feature of something by male or female. I don't think they're ever going to give it to us. But literally how I source is looking at the profile pictures. I know it's probably you know, not great, but because when I source for those type of roles, which are very heavy male oriented, you know, on the 25 profiles in one page, there's going to be 1 or 2 females. So it's a very quick sourcing by the profile pictures. And I only stop at a female, and then I look at the experience, and I only source for females. The same goes when I work with agencies. I tell them, look, we already have the males applying for the role, and we need to create, you know, the same field for everyone. So I only want to see females from you. That's why I'm giving you the role, because I know it's not easy. So you go out and find me the females, because we know they are out there, but they need to be tapped on the shoulder, because they're not going to apply for the role because they think that they might not hit all the requirements.
Yeah, I think doubling down on that, that's obviously fantastic, and intentional kind of sourcing and fishing for, yeah, obviously female candidates in your pipeline is fantastic. The other thing that I've seen work for myself is just cutting down your job description, right? Many times in my career, I've sent job descriptions to hiring managers and said, you have, you know, 15 dot points here, cut it down to 8, and then send it back to me. What's the most important 8 dot points and requirements in your role? And that creates less of that criteria, right? So statistically, there's less dot points that the candidate has to agree with in order for, in particular, her to feel confident to apply. So from a talent perspective, we can certainly do that. And I'm mindful of time, but there's this one other thing that I wanted to just speak about that came to mind, was down leveling. So I know a lot of us are in recruitment, talent acquisition. The questions look like they're coming from a HR people perspective. But during pipelines, it's our role to ensure that down levelings are happening only in extremely high data point and high data rich pipelines. What I mean by that is, especially in the large tech organization that I've worked with in the past, I won't name the organization, but I found that there was this unconscious bias, or maybe conscious bias, at each stage of the interview process, and the interviewing pool largely being male led to a lot of really great candidates that we as recruiters and talent acquisition and folks know that they're a principal, but as they go through the interview process, they get down level to a senior, right? And it's pushing back on that immediately to say, okay, what's the reason for that? What are the data points that you have that demonstrate that? And if there's any fluff there, you combat that immediately, because that's where a lot of females just fall apart. And sometimes it's a great organization, it's a shiny brand name, and the candidate will say, yeah, okay, for this company, I might do it. But she's doing herself a disservice in that respect as well, because it's going to take her 7 years to get back up to that principal level that she should have been hired for in the beginning, right? So yeah, just wanted to drop that in there.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a great one to call out, because I feel like that happens a lot, even nowadays. As soon as any hiring manager says to you, oh, we'll just see as the candidates come in, we'll just view, we'll just find the leveling as we go along. And I'm like, no, you pick your leveling beforehand and pick the exact requirements that you want for this person. And then we're not going to shift the role to suit the person that you've met along the way. I think that's one thing that we definitely do need to do better at pushing back on as a whole industry, because that's when things start falling apart. So yeah, thanks for calling that out, Ankit. I think that's definitely one very good thing that you can kind of squash in the bud at the very beginning.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I know Josephine's put in there as well that there's a few companies that do equity metrics dashboards and diversity metrics as well. You know, that's really great. Like, I know that not a lot of companies have access to that internally, especially if you're a startup. Like if we're 40 people, 30 people, it's really hard to kind of bring that along. But other companies have done it, and a lot of these big companies do put that out as well. So it's really good to take that from an external perspective and go, look, these are the impacts that diversity has had, and the mix of you know, even just the diversity of thought has led to XYZ, and this is how they've become a big company. So if they can do it, what's stopping you as a startup to do it from your end as well? Like I think those are really good metrics to call out. And yeah, if you don't have that internally, borrow it, steal it, it's all out there. Everything is external facing at the moment. There's lots of reports coming out. There's white papers out there that we have access to. So use it internally, use it to push upwards and to manage up as much as possible as well.
I'm surprised that HP has something like that in place. I know they've done a lot of initiatives, but you know, even they have, it's still like you still hear the shocking stories about, you know, female being harassed and not given the right opportunities, not being promoted. So that's surprising, but definitely, like we all know the data says the more diverse workplace leads to better financial results, better culture, more innovation. So definitely, that's what we should always keep in mind and put it in front of hiring managers who are skeptical.
Absolutely. Yeah, agreed. And especially if we're in like a B2C company, if your company's into B2C industry, chances are half of your consumers are women, right? If you're serving to all customers. So why aren't the people that are building your product half women, right? And it just makes sense from a bias perspective. We've seen so many AI tools fall on their backside recently, haven't we? With, you know, male-dominated engineering teams. And they've made this AI-powered resume sorter that is extremely biased towards women because men have coded it. So I think, yeah, it makes a whole lot of sense. And I think it's just the right thing to do. I can't believe we're in 2024 talking about this. It's a shame, but it is the right thing to do, guys. Come on.
It is. And even when you see those, I know there was a few years back, they'd released things like, automated AI recruitment bots, and it didn't work. It did fall flat on its face because everything was coded by men. And a lot of the questions that people were answering to this robot, when the answers were being filtered back, it was being filtered back with a male brain at the back of it. So it doesn't really, if you don't have that diversity of thought, you can't really expect any of your machine learning or AI to pick up. Like they're only being fed one aspect of it. So it's
Amazon. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, who are your biggest customers at the end of the day? And this is probably something that you need to take back to your leaders as well. That's actually a very good argument to take back and go, who are your biggest customers? Who are your biggest target markets for your products? And if you don't have that representation, if they don't have that representation, how are you selling it to that target market? It's very easy for them to look it up. We've got social media, we've got Instagram, we've got TikTok. Influencers are out there already calling out companies. So do you want to be one of those companies that gets called out and next day you've got no consumers at your door?
Yeah.
So,
very well said, Pavi.
Just being on the other side of this, I'm just, like you said, we're in 2024. I can't believe we're still having some of these conversations, but at what stage do we then kind of call it and go, we're all adults, we should be better than this, we should be doing better.
Yeah, absolutely.
If
but on the bright side, when I told my grandma about what International Women's Day was last week, like she was just, her brain exploded into a million pieces. I tried my best. I'm not the best like Hindi speaker, but I tried to explain it in our native language, and she was just, you know, as a brown woman, housewife for 60 years, trying to explain to her, hey, like we're actually celebrating women, not just in society, but in business. And she was just absolutely blown away. And I think that's one little positive to take away. Ankit's grandma was happy.
That's a huge positive to take away.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I don't think a lot of people from those generations see how much we've actually, evolved to this point, which is, another evolution in itself. Like it will take us a little while to move forward and get to the next stage. But, I think we need to look at it with the lens that, for me personally, I've got a little girl. Like, what do I want to change in the world for her to experience? I don't, there are things that we've gone through ourselves, and I don't want her to have those same experiences. So if I don't shift the dial, if I don't speak up or do anything about it, she's going to, feel the brunt of those decisions as well. So yeah, that's a huge driver on my part. And I know for a lot of people that we speak to, you know, even the mums that we speak to when we're doing school pickups and drop-offs, and we're like, oh, you know, did you hear about what this happened? How do we actually change that, instead of going, oh, did you hear that this happened at our workplace, but this is what I did to change it? I don't think we do as much of that as we should.
And if you think about it, it's only recent, right? Like in 1953, apparently the first women in Harvard Business School didn't have female bathrooms.
Yeah.
You know, so, and that's like only what, well, I keep saying 50, but more like 70 years ago. But it's, you know, it's shocking. And obviously there had to be a man who was an ally and who said, okay, well, let's take the budget and let's build female bathrooms. Crazy.
No, definitely. Like, yeah, I don't think if you put that in front of people today, how well would that go down?
Yeah.
I'm just going to read out a quick one in the Q&A. Someone had posted saying, I think we also need to think about others that do identify themselves as women, and really being an ally to them in the hiring process as well. So I just want to call that out because it's a very valid point that we probably haven't touched on in this space. But yeah, I think we do need to do a bit more of that.
I think that's a very good point. Yeah, because you know, it can happen that you are going to meet someone face to face for an interview and they come in and you might not recognize their gender, right? And you might be confused and then you might feel some discomfort. But I think, you know, in that case, you might panic maybe inside, and you might maybe ask that question many more, that candidate many more questions than you would normally, or you just talk too much and don't let them speak. So I think in those situations, we have to become used to our own discomfort, and it's not on the candidate, it's on you to make sure you're assessing the candidate based on the capabilities and skills, and their gender doesn't matter, right? But it's the discomfort that the interviewer himself has to become comfortable with.
No, definitely. I do see the time. We are running out of time at the moment, but I really appreciate everyone that's stuck around. I had written down some takeaways as well, just based off of this discussion. So really appreciate both your times, Ankit and Lenny, and for everyone else that's kind of jumped in and asked the questions, because we can't, again, like nothing's going to change if we don't ask the questions and highlight these issues. But some of the takeaways that I'd written down was you have to care to be an ally. No movement is going to be made if we don't actually care about the issue to actually make a difference. Gathering data points. So the more data points you have externally, the more impact you'll have as well. And putting that down on paper, which was a really good one Ankit called out. Write it down, put it in blogs, share it on your LinkedIn. The more we speak up, the better that issue is highlighted. And then I did write down the LOL layer. We love that, Ankit. Someone else had a message saying, yeah, I love the LOL layer, but leaders of leaders, definitely that layer is where you need to target with all of this and make sure that it does filter from top down. And then other little takeaways were creating empowerment circles in your workplaces, build it into your values, get HR to touch base with other parts of the organization to start making little changes to help people be heard. And then the other one from a TA perspective was intentional sourcing as well. Was there any other takeaways that I'd forgotten out of there, guys?
Yeah, just one. Pavi's a great host. Give it up for Pavi.
Thank you again, coming out of comfort zone, because this is not also comfortable for me to do as well. But yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for being very easy to deal with on the other end.
You killed it.
Thanks so much, everyone, for joining in, and hopefully we'll see some great momentum come off the back of this as well.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey, guys.
Hi, thank you so much. That was amazing.
I didn't know if we were staying on or not when it
Yep,
was cutting
neither.
off.
Yeah, sorry, I should have made a note. The reason I haven't ended it for everyone is because yesterday I did that and it was supposed to just end for attendees so then we could stay on and just touch base and chat, but it ended entirely and I wanted to say thank you. So I was like, I'm not gonna just leave the call, but that was amazing. It was so engaging and insightful. It was absolutely brilliant session. Thank you.
Yeah, kudos, Pavi. That was
Appreciate it.
so easy. That was just a lot of
Thank
fun,
you.
that conversation.
I
Yeah.
was sitting here going, oh my God. Like I said, I can't do public speaking. That's one of my things that I'm working on. So inside, I was mortified.
Wow.
You
You're
guys made
natural.
it easy.
You are a
You
natural.
are. I 100% agree. That was like honestly, it was, I've, attended a lot of webinars and panels and sessions, and this was so like, I was so comfortable and it was so like, truly, I was really engaged and it was beautifully done. And I've genuinely got pages and pages of takeaway. Like, you all just nailed it. Thank you. It was so good. It was so good. Thank you so much.
It was a good group. Thanks, Ankit, for a lot of the takeaways as well. It's been,
My-
I'm going to try and use these empowerment circles internally as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's an absolute pleasure being here. My mom's super proud of me being here.
Good.
Yeah. I didn't
You can
go
tell
with
her,
the
just be
Andrew
like,
Tate.
look, Mum.
Yeah. But no, this is really cool. Thank you very much for being here, guys. Special shout out to Care Australia, my favorite charity, supports women in third world countries by starting businesses for them through microfinance loans.
Oh, that's
So
amazing.
in the spirit of IWD Week, Care Australia,
Oh yeah. Thank you.
OG charity. Lean In Inc., another non-for-profit
Yep.
that I work with here, empowering women in Western Sydney, get job ready, migrant women or ethnic women that are, you know, re-entering the workforce after giving birth to 2-3 kids. So yeah, both very, very good causes. Follow them on LinkedIn.
Will do.
They both should be in my LinkedIn, but yeah,
Thank you.
shameless plugs. But
Yeah,
thank you very much for
absolutely.
including me. I hope I did it justice, but it's a very important topic. You can never do it justice, I think. But you guys did great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll be posting, I'm getting into posting on LinkedIn, much to my dismay, but I'm getting there. So I'll be giving you shout outs and I'll also mention Care Australia and Lean In Inc. as well, because love that. Absolutely. Thank you so much, both of you. Have the best week.
Appreciate it. You too.
I hope to see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
See you
everyone.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.